Core Scientific files for bankruptcy at Southern District of Texas Bankruptcy Court. They are one of the largest Bitcoin miners by computing power and operating over 143,000 mining rigs and host another 100,000. They currently have approximately 1,000 to 5,000 creditors. Yikes. The company's stock is down 98% this year. Estimated liabilities are between 1 billion to 10 billion according to the filing, but I believe as we discussed that yesterday, when you file for bankruptcy, that's like the only checkbox you can click or select, I guess, which is kind of ridiculous. Anyways, though, they reached a deal with some of their lenders to restructure the debt in a prepackaged bankruptcy. I'm not sure if that would be a Chapter 11 or not. I'm not a legal advisor. I actually want to toss this over to Jen because she put her hand up, and I want to hear Jen's take on it.
Yeah, so Chapter 11 allows the company to keep operating while trying to restructure the debt. And so this morning I went and just did a quick Google of like some notable companies that have gone through Chapter 11 and are still surviving. GM, Marvel, and Converse have all gone through Chapter 11 bankruptcy. So maybe there is some hope at the end of the tunnel here for Core. So, I mean, I'm going to kick it off to Will to get the ins and outs of this, but they're going to continue operating. They say they are still cash flow positive, and they're just going to, be restructuring to try and figure out how they're going to pay back some of these debts. Will, I'm sure you can give us more of the background on the mining side of things, but I just want to point out that this is a little bit different than some of the other bankruptcies we've been speaking about lately.
Yeah, I know too much about this, so you guys are going to have to sit on your hands and listen to me for a second. Before we get into it, disclosure, I do work for a Bitcoin mining company running media for them. So in terms of Chapter 11 for Core Scientific, there's a lot of things to know about this. They are the largest North American miner. They are publicly listed. They went through a SPAC last year, which is pretty notable that they're able to use the bull market, get listed, and now they're in trouble, right? They're a penny stock. They were once trading for a few dollars. Now they're basically worthless, right? They're down 98+%. On top of this, we have a lot of unsecured debt, which needs to be looked into as well, which is a bad taste for everybody who's a part of this, right? So we have B. Riley, which is a big financer out there, Shell Energy, the U.S. Customs and Border Patrol for some reason, Kentucky Department of Revenue, Duke Energy, a bunch of other energy firms. I think that this is probably the most important thing to take away from this, from all these minor bankruptcies and Chapter 11s, is who's going to be impacted and going to be pissed off in 6, 12, 18 months when the next bull market comes. And I think if you have like a long tail effect from anything that happens with the miners, it might be with the energy sector, and they might not be as interested in working with Bitcoin miners, which was a huge narrative over the last 2 years, Bitcoin miners working with energy companies. And if these Bitcoin miners keep popping and failing to control their own financials, well, these energy companies might not have an interest in having that exposure at all. So I think that is one thing to be watching here. There's a lot more interest in details around this Chapter 11. They're trying to restructure. They still have cash flows. They're just trying to restructure all this debt with, which they have about $1 billion in debt. So it's a huge hurdle to get over. I think that is one thing to really walk away from this with. Zach, I'll throw it up to you for your take on the story.
Yeah, a lot of bankruptcy all around us in the crypto space. It's Chapter 7. That's like the real bad news. That's like done, you're toast, you're getting liquidated. That's it. Chapter 11 definitely provides an escape hatch, I guess, for these companies to land on their feet in some new capacity down the line. So interesting to see if this ultimately pans out, if they can weather the storm, get protection from some of their creditors before the next bull market hits, and then come out going firing gangbusters by the time the Bitcoin price keeps coming up. So I don't know. I think like right now, Bitcoin mining firms are really suffering, right? Because it's really just like pretty thin margin business. I think Will probably knows this better than most. It's about where you can identify cheap power and where you can keep cranking out some of those Bitcoins to stay afloat. And obviously right now with Bitcoin down, it becomes a much more difficult calculus. And you're seeing this across the mining sector with, these companies that rushed to go public at the height of last year's boom, ultimately hit the public markets at a really bad time relative to where crypto fell in terms of its cyclicality. So hard one for Core Scientific. They were definitely a big player, and hopefully they'll emerge in some sort of way, shape, or form on the other end of this Chapter 11 process. I saw Wendy and Will put their hands up, so I'm going to toss to Wendy, and then we'll get Will back.
Quick thing. Actually, question to Will. Why don't Bitcoin mining companies take into consideration the current 4-year cycle with Bitcoin and altcoins and plan a little bit better around that?
Yeah, great thing. And I was gonna bring that up anyways. With my point is a lot of these mining companies rush to public. They rush to go onto Nasdaq or New York Stock Exchange. Why? Because they want that capital. If you're able to list, you become more liquid. You can sell those shares that you have in a private company and end up pretty well. And Core Scientific actually did that. Their founders sold a lot of shares back in April and May of this year, on top of a lot of their common shareholders, basically, who might be wiped out from everything that's going to happen right now. And I think that is sort of the playbook that a lot of people in Bitcoin mining, or anyone really who went public in crypto the last 2 years, did, because they wanted to get shares for their work that they put in over the last few years. The flip side, though, is oftentimes with how cyclical Bitcoin is with this 4-year cycle, you can't quite bridge the gap between those years, right? And even being public doesn't necessarily mean that you're able to make it to the next 4 years. You might become a penny stock in between, and you might even go out of business because you have more exposure as a public company. So I think out of this, we really have to ask some questions about, should companies that are in Bitcoin and in crypto go public, or should they stay private? There's obviously a lot of benefits to going public. You have more liquidity, you have more capital, you have a bigger, broader space to put your name out there. But it's hard to know if you're going to make it to the next cycle.